Okay, Jonathan here from Elixir Therapy, and we're here to discover how to hack our spiritual experience. How to hack the personal spiritual experience. This is going to be a doozy, and we're talking about something that in some ways resists being talked about. And that, in fact, this definition that you are going to uncover is going to be really, really important. That if we look at the kind of objective definition of spirituality, we're looking at the term spirit, which in a lot of cases has a relationship to breathing or breath or the soul being breathed into us by a creator, some kind of thing like that. And it's also really amazing to me that so many of the spiritual paths have breathing techniques as one of the most foundational, or if not the most foundational practice for the lineage or the technique. In addition to that, when a person is having a spiritual experience, at least the ones we've been able to study, like the Heart Math Institute, that kind of thing, a blissful, happy, at one experience, the rate of breathing is going to change. So there is a biological, measurable way to know whether you're in the having a spiritual experience. And in this introduction, what I want to talk about is the definition of spirituality, how that doesn't equal necessarily that it being the truth, and then the overall kind of equation that we're going to use to hack our own spiritual experience. Okay, first, I want to start off with the idea that it seems as if human beings have a biological ability to have spiritual experiences. Just like we have a biological ability to sneeze or to orgasm or to go to sleep, to have different experiences, and that the spiritual experience is an experience. That doesn't mean it's the truth. And this is where I see so many people, in my opinion, making an error here. That just because a person has had an experience doesn't mean it's actually true. Just because we have a biological ability to have an experience of God, that doesn't make it true. That doesn't mean there is a God. It also doesn't disprove it. But a lot of the hangups I see people have is the idea that because I have had an experience of something, it means that that thing is actually real. It doesn't. For the person, it may be subjectively real because they experienced it. For them, that it may be real because they experienced it. But we're not able to transmit certainty to other people. So for us, it can be subjectively true, but it doesn't mean it's objectively true. Now, this has already been looked at by William James in Varieties of Religious Experience. What he's looking at is this idea that people have spiritual experiences. Is it important to get sidetracked on whether they're actually objectively true or not? And the answer he gets to is no. For the person, they're real enough. And in some ways, there's kind of two pathways. There actually is having the religious experience or spiritual experience, and there's discussing it and there's talking about it. And this is the academic concern, and this is the actual experiential concern. And that's what we're concerned with, the experiential concern. Okay. The pathways we're going to go through today, the things that I've had experience with, and I've seen clients have good experiences with. We're going to look at the techniques of Christianity, Buddhism / Zen. There's some overlap there. The sorcery tradition that we get through Carlos Castaneda, Taisha Abelard, Florinda Donnegrau, and Taoism. What we see with the spiritual experience, mostly for people, is that there isn't just one path that's working for everyone. And we need to ask ourselves, what's going on there? If Christianity or Buddhism or Taoism or sorcery or something is true, If it's the real deal, why doesn't it work for everybody? And this is going to be one of the hearts of our course here, is that if something doesn't work, that may mean you need to drop it. It may not align with your belief system, or you can try modifying it. If you think there's something there in that practice and it's just not hitting you right, you can modify it. And what I want to say is that these traditions were created by other people. What your thoughts about these practices and about how you want to practice and what you want to do and what you don't want to do is just as important, if not more so, than the originators of these lineages. They modified these things as well. They created some of these things, or they took other practices and modified them in their own certain way. The first step that we're going to need to look at is defining for ourselves, you defining for yourself what spirituality is. And I specifically mean the somatic definition. What I mean is, what is the experience that you have? What does it feel like in your mind, body, your emotions, in your soul, if you believe in a soul? What does it feel like to you? And if you never had a spiritual experience ever at all, then the idea is, what do you want it to be like? And we need to actually define that. So I hope you will pull out your phone, pull out paper or your computer, because a lot of this is going to be based on you taking notes and you determining your own definition of these things. Because until you have the experience that you want, it's not going to be good enough for you. So it has to match your definition. For the more science-minded people, and that was certainly me when I started down this pathway, what I want to say is that the spiritual experience is a measurable, biological, repeatable experience that will be based on your own personal definition of what entails a spiritual experience. What does it feel like to you? What's going on? What happens during it? What is it like? And then finding the practices that trigger that experience. And whether that's a lineage that we're taking from a few, or we're creating our own practice, doesn't matter if we're getting the experience that we want. One little note here. In some of the branches of Taoism or Buddhism, they might fight back against what I said, because they might say that the spiritual state is not an experience. Why? Why would they say this? Part of their idea in their practices in that world is that as we drop our thinking and drop the ego, we start to feel at one with the universe or our surroundings, and we're no longer there anymore. There's no longer a personal ego there to experience at all. And so that in some ways, the spiritual state could be argued that it's not an experience, because suddenly there's not a individualized center, self, personal self there anymore to experience it. Okay? However, notice, it's so easy to get trapped, start going over into the academic concerns, the semantics of all these different things, when really what matters here is the experience and your own personal definition, but not the definition that's going to make everybody else happy. That's probably not going to happen. It's too easy to argue over what a spiritual state is and isn't for each person, because I think in a lot of cases it's going to be a personalized experience. I don't necessarily think that my spiritual experience is going to match anybody else, and I don't necessarily think, because of my experience in life, that the triggers, the practices that work for me are going to work for anybody else. Okay. This is why I think the traditional paths don't work the way that they claim they are, because either people are not modifying the practices to fit their own belief system, or they're a member of that path because of their culture or because they were brought up in it. There's really actually not that much interest in it, besides in belonging to a group and belonging to a culture and feeling safe for belonging to that status quo, which makes a lot of sense, of course, right? But those people aren't having spiritual experiences as a result of the practices they're doing. Now, do spiritual experiences happen naturally? Yes, that's part of my hypothesis, absolutely based on my experiences, other people's experiences, and a number of looking at the science of when people are having what they report as spiritual experiences, that there are ways for it to happen. I think it's a biological fact that we can have these kind of experiences. And again, that doesn't mean that it makes it true. It means that the experience is real, but it doesn't mean it has a truth value. Don't get caught up in that. Don't get caught up in that. It's a trap there. What we're looking at is the somatic experience, describing how it feels to us, meaning there's some type of trigger for that to happen. The environment triggers the experience within us. So we're looking for what are the practices, what are the things that will cause that experience to arise in us naturally. If it's hard work, it's not going to be it. Now, could there be a subset of people that they do need the practice to be like really difficult and hard? Yes, absolutely. It just doesn't necessarily have to be that. If part of your definition of the ideal spiritual experience is that it's very easy, it arises on its own, then any type of technique that's really, really difficult and you have to put a lot of effort and force into it, that's not for you. But if it's the opposite, then maybe it is for you, right? What's important is your definition. What I've seen, what I'm going to share is that in these spiritual traditions we're going to look at, and I would hazard to guess all of them, but because I'm not an expert in all of the spiritual techniques that have ever existed, what I can say is that the ones that I am familiar with, the ones that I've explored, the ones that I've practiced, the ones I've seen other people explore and practice, they seem to have very specific behaviors or practices around what to do with the thoughts, what to do with the body, and what to do with the emotions. And then some of them will take it a step further and they'll talk about what you want to do with your soul or what you want to do with your energy or the state that you're in. There might be another factor. But in some of these traditions, the idea of soul and stuff like that is not in there, right? So it depends on the lineage and your own definition about what spirituality is. And if that includes something like a soul or the energy that animates us or the force or the spirit and things like that. Okay, let's do an overview of what this practice is going to be like. And then that will be the end of our introduction. Okay. First step, and you need to write this down. You need to define in as much descriptive language as you can what a spiritual experience is like to you, either from ones you've already had before or what it is you're looking for. Okay, you need to be able to describe that in words. And the most important words here are going to be somatic. What that means is describing what it feels like in your body. And that can include what it is you're seeing in your mind or your imagination, but looking at what do the legs feel like? What does your torso feel like? What is the breathing doing? How are you thinking? What are you visualizing? What type of emotions are you feeling? And how do you feel that in the body? Being able to describe this is fundamental to it being successful. If you can't describe the state you're after, you're just going to search around in the dark. You're going to have no idea, even when it happens, if that's the thing or not. And if you've never had a spiritual experience, that's fine. What do you want it to be like? We have a biological ability to have these experiences. So you can have any of these experiences. Anything you can come up with, anything you can dream up, it's possible to have that experience. That is what I'm positing today, okay? And I hope you find out that I'm right, and then you're happy about it. And if you find out I'm wrong, then remember, everything that I offer is 100% money back guarantee. This is no scam. I won't scam anymore. I know what it's like to be on the lookout for a real spiritual path, real spiritual techniques, and to get a runaround or a scam or a one-size-fits all thing where do this, and if it doesn't work for you, it means there's something wrong with you? No! That technique is not for me. or for you. Or I need to modify it based on my own intelligence and creativity, modify it so that I think it might work for me. And then we'll look at some of these techniques for the body, mind, emotions, and spirit. And the goal is to have maybe one or two practices that trigger your particular brand, your particular flavor of spiritual experience for the body, mind, emotions, and spirit. We want one or two practices. And look, one is good enough. If you find one thing, great. The idea is that maybe there's more, but if you just find one thing that allows you to trigger your body into feeling, into entering, into letting arise the spiritual experience, something you're doing with your thought process, something you're doing with your emotions, and something you're doing with your energy, and they all work, you're set up. You'll be fine there. And maybe you'll find other things that's fine. Okay. That is our introduction. We're going to start off looking at Christianity and the practices for body, mind, emotions, and spirit there, and see if there's, and your job as you're hearing about this stuff is to kind of feel like, ooh, does that sound interesting? Does that not? I might want to try that. I might want to modify that slightly based on my beliefs, based on what I've defined during this first introduction. Okay? Then after that, we'll go into the Zen and Buddhism, kind of slight overlap there, or major overlap, depends on who you ask. Then on to the Castaneda sorcery, and then ending with Taoism. If you only want to look at one of those, or you're only really interested in one of those lineages, just skip ahead. Follow your own natural inclination, your own entrance. There's a saying in Buddhism that Buddha made 84,000 entrances, doors, the doorless door to enter into the state. There's a lot of different ways. Follow your own natural inclination, your own natural feeling of, oh, it might be that. It's definitely not that, blah. Or it's almost that. I just need to modify one thing. I want to add this one thing to that, and I think it might work. And then see if it does. All right. End of intro. I'll see you for overview of the spiritual techniques of Christianity next. All right.